Hello, folks. We're in historic West Asheville. Welcome. I'm Gabi White.
And I'm George Lentz.
And we're bordering Louisiana right now, a property owned originally by
Dr. Porter B. Orr.
Yeah. So this site is actually registered in the as a National Historic Site. It's been around
State
Historic Site. Correction. And it's got a lot of history to it, and George is here to speak to that as a neighbor, and we're going to talk a little bit about the ecology of this place, which has beautiful water as well as plant life. And George, why don't you start us off telling us about the history of Mr. P.B. Orr?
Okay, I've been here in the neighborhood for 35 years now, and I've been interested in the history of the place, especially over here since it's so different from the other little cookie cutter sort of houses on the other side of the street. This is like a gentleman's farm, a small estate here in the middle of the city. Mm-hmm. And I've learned through researching at Pike Library, reference department, city directories, that sort of thing, found out the ownership and some of the history of the place. And I've managed to tie it to the Jarrett house, which is up at the top of the street, up closer to Haywood Road. It's been recently restored to beautiful condition. There was family ties. Dr. Orr, Dr. Porter Bynum Orr, who was a local physician, practiced from about 1900 to 1946-47 when he died. Was credited for having delivered 6,000 babies in the area. Anyway, he had the place built, so I understand, back around the turn of the century, about 1900. Lived here for most of 20 years, I guess. Originally, he was single, lived to his mother, who was 70 years old. And I think it was the 1900 census. His mother was 70 years old. She was head of household. He was only 29 and he was single. 10 years later, he was head of household and had a couple of children. So anyway, his mother was a Jarrett, and I've recently learned that there is in fact a Jarrett cemetery, which is located up on the hill behind Ingalls at the corner of Lester Highway and Patton Avenue. There's a cemetery up there called Jarrett Cemetery. That's where Dr. Orr and a number of the Jarretts are buried. Anxious to go up there and see what's there. But anyway, Dr. Orr had this place. Louisiana Avenue at that time was not named Louisiana. The Jarretts up at the top of the hill and Dr. Orr's place here was the extent of the development. The road dead-ended. I'm sure it was unpaved, but it dead-ended coming up the driveway to the Orr place here. And it was still woodland going down to County Home Road, which eventually became Patton Avenue. But anyway, he had gardens, apparently had a pond. There's some water, some wetland. The property slopes off pretty sharp angle along the back, goes down the bottom of the hill. There's a little stream, a little creek that flows through there now. So the story goes, he once had a pond there, and there was fish in it. He probably had some farm animals, that sort of thing. And it was just one of the first two places on the street from everything I can tell. And it was not developed. The rest of the street was really not developed and named till about 1930, the late 20s, 1930. And then about 1935 or so was when the street was actually continued on through the woods down to County Home Road, which, as I said, became Patton Avenue.
Mm-hmm. And so I understand P.B. Orr owned this house as a doctor, and then of the folks, who was the next people that you know to own it?
It exchanged hands on almost an annual basis.
Oh.
Yeah. no one had it for more than about 4 or 5 years. And I kind of think the Orrs must have continued to own it and then rent it to people. And there was a funeral director who lived here, and someone who worked for Railway Express, which later I think became UPS, back in the days of the railways and everything. Just any number of people. You can look through the city directories of Asheville and see that every couple of years there was a different name of someone living here at 178 Louisiana Avenue. And that continued until after the war, meaning World War II, and about 1951 or 52, Mr. Charles Lanning bought the property, and he lived here. I had firsthand knowledge. I knew him rather well because having lived here since 1980 across the street. He had 10 children, and most of them were grown and gone before I knew him, but his children grew up here. He raised a very extensive garden here, had apple trees, had grapevines, a couple of dogs always. And he and his wife, I knew them when they were still working. He was a plasterer, built government buildings, did the plaster work in government buildings, quite the craftsman apparently. But anyway, as I said, knew him quite well, and he probably continued to use the property as Dr. Orr would have originally intentioned, as a bit of a farm. And Charlie, of course, had to feed his 10 children and couldn't just shop for groceries for that many people, and he grew a lot of his own food in that. But anyway, yeah, it's quite a piece of property, and there's trees, I'm sure they're 75 years old and more, big oak trees on the property adjoining the Army Reserve Armory. And the wetland down in the back, and pretty good buffer between the house as it exists now and the backyards of all the houses, the 8 houses along Tanglewood Drive that go along the south side of the property. But anyway, that's pretty well my extent of the knowledge or the property and its history.
Yeah. Well, George, thanks for talking with us. We captured a spirit of the history here. This house site built in at least the early 1900s, and there's trees that stand 3-4 feet in diameter, oaks, there's wetlands. This property, when it began its spirit in Asheville, had a life to it, and it's continued that life for the most part in the same way.